There's one particular argument that people are deploying to make the claim that most land in South Africa is already in the hands of black people. It's being used to undermine efforts at land reform, culminating in the signing of the Expropriation Act, because it holds that there's no need to transfer land ownership because the land in South Africa is already fairly distributed by race. Since at least 2018, a claim doing the rounds on social media alleges that white people own only around 22% of South Africa's land. This claim has been circulating again now in the light of the recent tensions around the Expropriation Act. But is it true? I'm Rebecca Davis, senior journalist for Daily Maverick. Now, the first thing to note is that if white people did own 22% of South Africa's land, that would still be a disproportionate amount, given that the latest census from 2022 suggests that just 7.3% of the population is white. And the stats are further skewed if you take into account gender, which most of the current discussion doesn't. But white men, individually, are still much more likely to own land than white women. So when you're talking about the total white land-owning demographic, it's likely to be significantly less than even 7.3% of the total population of South Africa. But let's look at the actual facts here. Something important is that there's very poor record keeping around land in South Africa. But the most comprehensive data set we currently have is from the November 2017 Land Audit Report. This report is the source of the 22% white ownership claim. Now, this is a flawed report. For one thing, it doesn't have any information about the ownership of land held by companies or trusts, which is probably quite extensive. So it doesn't include, for instance, land held by white-owned companies. But the report gives data on 3 categories of land ownership: farming and agricultural land, urban land, and ownership in estates and complexes. So here's the first category: ownership of farming and agricultural land. These figures are from the report. As you can see, what the report says is that white people own 72% of farmland and agricultural holdings in South Africa. So where this 22% figure comes in, that so many people have misleadingly cited, is that the total amount of farmland owned by white people amounts to around 22% of South Africa's total land mass. The report also states, by the way, that though the figures differ from province to province, there is no province in South Africa where whites own less than 53% of the farmland. But that's only one part of the overall land picture, since not all South African land is farmland. So let's go to the second category: ownership of urban land. Here you can see that whites are once again recorded as owning the highest percentage of this type of land in terms of land area, 49%, as opposed to African ownership at 30%. This is despite the fact that there are more individual African landowners in the country than whites, suggesting basically the plots owned by whites tend to be on average bigger. The third category is ownership of complexes or estates. And here again, as you can see, the lion's share of hectares is owned by white people. So basically, when people say white people own 22% of the South African land, they are falsely leaving out the rest of the report, which, as mentioned, is a flawed report, but it simply doesn't say what they're claiming it says. What we really need to settle a lot of the current confusion and misinformation is a much more meticulous, up-to-date and comprehensive land audit, which would also include firm figures for how much land the government owns, which is also the subject of dispute.